Sarah, welcome to the Heart Healing Podcast. It's a real honor to have you here all the way from New York today.
Thank you so much for having me, Pandora. I appreciate it.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to talk all about your new book, The Motherload.
Thank you. I can't wait to, I'm like a little bit worried that people are sick of me, but I can't wait to talk about it.
They're definitely not sick of you. They haven't heard enough of you. So let's start by talking about Motherload. I think it's very different to your typical motherhood memoir, and it's very brutally honest. So how would you describe the book to someone who picks it up for the first time?
Yeah, the book is about my experience after I had my firstborn child 7 years ago with a postpartum depression that was arduous and lasted almost a year. I try to make it funny and entertaining, even though that shit's serious, because I wrote the book that I wished I had had. And I like reading books that are propulsive and page-turny and filled with drama. And the reality was, I had a lot of drama. Like, I hated my husband, found him useless, was let down by many people in my life, had a lot of things that I wanted to complain about, even though I felt like I didn't really deserve to complain. And I just wanted to share my truth, because when I let go of a lot of the shame that I had felt for most of my life as a woman, I suddenly felt the most me I had ever been and the lightest I had ever felt. And I wanted to write something that I felt like might help build a world where other women could do the same.
So how did the journey with postpartum depression begin? I mean, when did the cracks start to appear, and when did you start to realize that things were going south?
You know, so in retrospect, I was depressed in my pregnancy, and I was kind of battling the legacy of some traumas that had happened to me in my life. We all have them, you know. But specifically, I'd been sexually assaulted in my 20s. It's like a lot of women have been. And I think a real catalyst for the depression was a birth that was not medically scary for any reason, but it left me really broken, feeling really violated, and really terrified. I almost had PTSD from it. It was a real trigger for my sexual assault memories. And pretty immediately, I knew something was wrong, because, you know, there's this myth, right? Like, your kid's born and the nurses hand him to you, and you're supposed to immediately fall in love and have like this fireworks show of emotion, hormones surging through your body. And in my mind, I had expected that to happen and expected all my maternal instincts to kick in. And when I looked at my son after 19 hours of labor, I felt nothing. I felt completely shut down and disassociated, and I could not imagine a world where caring for him would bring me joy or fulfillment. I wasn't even curious about him. And that level of disassociation, I knew something was wrong with it, but at the time I chalked it up to me being a failure as a woman. And I thought it was just because I wasn't meant for motherhood. And I felt so much like shame and guilt about that, of course. And then other cracks started appearing over the course of the next like 3, 4, 5 months, where my husband's every move made me filled with rage. I felt very disconnected from my mother, who I'd always been close with. I felt a lot of anger towards the doctor who had delivered my child. She performed 2 procedures on me while I was in labor without my consent. In a hospital in America, you imply consent by walking in, but I'm not talking about legally. I mean, she, didn't emotionally, I didn't feel that she supported me in my labor. So I was feeling this strange mix of like angry emotions, and I couldn't quite make sense of them. And I knew that that wasn't normal either, but it didn't look like what the postpartum depression I read about in books or saw on TV. So I didn't think that I kind of qualified. I didn't think I was like sick enough. I wasn't in bed crying all day with dirty hair. So I didn't think that I counted as having postpartum depression. It took a really long time for me to figure out that's what it was. It took a year after I had him.
And do you think you had an inkling that you might be susceptible to postpartum depression, given the mental health struggles that you had experienced up to the birth of your child?
Not really, because I thought that was just what it meant to be a woman in this world. I thought that like just being a girl meant that you lived in a patriarchy, that there were systems that kind of took from you, that there were, men who chipped away at your personhood, who didn't necessarily value you for anything more than how you looked or portrayed yourself as a woman. I had felt like simultaneously objectified in my life and never beautiful enough and never thin enough and never good enough to be valued as a woman. And just like existing in that paradox felt like what I deserved for being a girl, kind of. So it's not like I ever looked at my life and was like, oh, you really suffered from mental illness. I looked at my life and thought, well, that's what you deserve for being a woman. All of society tells you that. Now you're entering this new phase that's supposed to be fulfilling. And like, I had this idea that when you became a mom, everything fell into place for you, you know? And I saw so many women around me for whom that was true. And I was like so jealous. I wanted that so badly. And I was like, wow, you're really a failure. You're not good at being a girl.
And I think that's such a common myth that so many women are fed. And I think there are many more women now writing and speaking about the fact that maybe they're consciously deciding not to have a child, and actually maybe that's a positive decision. And I'm someone who is at an age where most of my friends are having children, and some of them are having their second babies now. And I am made to feel very much like an outsider because it's not something at the moment that is a huge priority. It's not, I've had my own mental health struggles and I feel like my life is really just beginning. And I now observe from the sidelines the sacrifices that they're having to make being mothers and the absolute selflessness that being a mother involves. And it's tough. It like takes a real toll on your mental health, regardless of whether you've got issues or not.
And regardless of whether you have a ton of help and a ton of resources or not, it's still hard. And like the unfortunate thing, right, is that biology hasn't caught up with culture. I'm 40, I only now feel prepared to be a mom. But like there's limitations to what biology can do for you, because at a certain point, you are too old to have kids, right? And like there's no way around that. That's just like the reality of the science that we're given in the world that we live in. And I like really pity women having to make those decisions. Like I was never a girl who dreamed about having babies. I wasn't a kid who loved babysitting and played with baby dolls and was like, one day I'll be a mom. And I didn't know if I wanted kids or not. It just sort of happened to me. Like I got pregnant with the guy that I thought I should be married to. I was ticking boxes, you know, never really interrogating these roles that culture decides for us. I like really applaud women who are in charge of their destiny in a way that they're not afraid to ask those questions and like be sure of themselves before they take steps in their life. I wasn't that smart. I just did whatever I thought I was supposed to do. I was just trying to be good at being a girl. I don't know, though, even if I had been more judicious about the decisions that I made, I don't know that it would have ruled out having kids altogether, but I think it would have given me the ability to put safety nets into place that would have made it more palatable and less harmful for me. And I think it's like really smart for women to think along those lines. Like the government's not going to help you. Patriarchal culture is not going to help you. So you have to be really intentional about what you want in your life as a woman, you know? And it's true when you say like these mothers are so selfless and they make sacrifices. In the best of circumstances, there are magical things about motherhood. It's profound. We know that. Those narratives are everywhere. But I'm constantly like torn between feeling incredibly grateful and blessed for my children and for everything that I have, and grieving the fact that I'll never be able to go back to the person that I was. And I don't know if she's better or cooler or more fun or whatever, but she's a different version of me that I'll never meet again.
And that's a really fantastic point you make. And I think that's something that the book really conveys, is there's that sense of loss of identity. And suddenly you're in this moment of being like, who am I? I'm not my old self, but I haven't fully stepped into this new persona that I'm adopting. And particularly when you're suffering with postpartum depression, that feeling that you're like an imposter in your body and in this role, and as a wife and as a mum, like you're trying to perform all these roles and you don't feel like you're doing anyone particularly well. And it's really, really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, the rupture to your identity is massive. Like I always say, postpartum depression is a rational response to an insane thing that happens. Like, okay, you make another human, it lives in your body already, that's like alien, right? Then it comes out of a hole in your body And then your body looks totally different, and you're leaking out of all the places you can leak out of, and your hormones are going nuts, and you can't go back to work, which for me was a huge part of my joy and a part of what made me feel successful and capable and fulfilled. And all of that changes overnight. And your sole focus becomes keeping this tiny thing alive. And this tiny thing doesn't make eye contact and doesn't smile at you. And like, you don't know if it knows your name or who you are, right? I mean, science shows us that little tiny babies know our voices and stuff like that. But I didn't feel that. I didn't feel it in my cells when I met my kid. And that is so hard. You work so hard as a woman to carve out a place for yourself in this world. And it's like right when you get there, I was just feeling on my own 2 feet in the world when I had my first kid. And it's like you explode your life in a way. Of course I was depressed. The only way that would have felt worth it to me is if I was madly in love with my baby and I was so disassociated and traumatized from my birth that I couldn't love him at all. And like, I felt like a monster.
Of course you do. I mean, because you again, like someone who's got a lot of self-awareness and has that worrying inner critic going on, that sort of overdrive, which is probably on super overdrive after you've had a kid because of all the hormonal changes and things. You suddenly think, oh my God, I'm this absolute monster. How can I possibly have given birth to something which I don't feel anything towards? Am I emotionless? Am I a robot? It must be such a challenge.
And it's not the version of motherhood that you've ever seen. Like from the Middle Ages, we've seen Madonna with Christ. We've seen this mother who is filled with emotion and love and sacrifice and patience and generosity. I didn't have any of that. I was just like an oozing, big, stretched out mess who wanted to go back and wear my clothes and see my friends and go back to my job. And that me was totally gone.
So will you talk us through in details? So you leave the hospital.
Yes.
You've discovered that you've had these 2 procedures which you didn't give your consent for. One of them being, I think, something called the husband stitch.
Correct, yeah.
Which, tell us what is the husband stitch?
So after I gave birth, I had an epidural at this point, so I didn't feel anything. But I was sitting there with my husband. They're like cleaning the baby up or whatever they do, in the minutes after you give birth. And the doctor goes, okay, I'm stitching you up right now. I'm giving you 1 stitch. You don't actually need it. It's mostly for him. And pointed at my husband. And I remember in the moment he and I looked at each other like, wait, what? And then afterwards I was like, mostly for him? Why? Like having a stitch in your genitals when you don't need it is pretty violent, Like that's a choice that someone made on my behalf. And for my husband, like he's fine. He didn't need that. And so that was one thing. And then also during my birth, before I had the epidural, my doctor told me that she needed to break my water. I think you say waters here, which is way chicer, but basically puncture my amniotic sac. And in the hospital where I gave birth, that is done with a large, looks like a knitting needle, piece of metal with a hook on the ends, which enters your vagina and goes through your cervix and tears the amniotic sac. The amniotic sac itself, as I understand, does not have nerve endings, and that part of it, the procedure is not painful. But it was the parts before we got there where it went through my cervix were unbearably painful for me. And I was like screaming and hyperventilating, and my hands were shaking, and I was trying to crawl backwards from her off the bed. I mean, I went into like pure terror, freak out mode. And she looked at me right in the eyes after she did it, and she said, I don't know why you're complaining. I've done this like 2 other times this week, and no one else complained but you. And it like broke me because I remember thinking, you trusted this woman. You hired her because you thought she was caring, and because she would, on this day, the most dangerous day of your life already, right? And the most dangerous day of your baby's life. You thought that she would go above and beyond to take care of you. In my mind, the word care embedded within that is empathy and kindness. You assumed she would have that for you. And in fact, she wants you not to die maybe because like then she'd have, to deal with the insurance company, like pay money or something. But she doesn't actually care if you walk out of here an intact human. And I felt so terrified for myself when I realized that. I remember willing my brain, saying to myself, do not feel emotions. Because if you do, this is going to be an incredibly scarring experience. Turn your brain off. Don't feel anything. And then when my baby was born and they handed him to me, I couldn't turn it back on. I couldn't start feeling again. I felt like I had been through like some kind of, I hate to use the word because it seems insensitive, but like a war crime or something, because it was like my body wasn't mine. It was like I felt like she didn't mind violating me because she didn't consider me a whole person. It was terrible, and it was such a catalyst. I think that is really what stole that first year of my baby's life for me.
Well, it sounds like, as you said, it took you back to that trauma that you experienced.
Totally. It was so triggering.
And then it sounds like, you were suffering from a form of PTSD, and it was totally understandably, as anyone who'd been through what you had gone through, and even without the sexual trauma that had preceded the birth. I mean, it sounds awful.
Awful. And I'm so not alone in this. Like, she was like, it shouldn't hurt that much, whatever. I've gone down Reddit rabbit holes and reached the edges of the internet. And there are so many women who find this procedure like barbarically painful. And if I had known better, if I had been more aware of what my physical boundaries are, I think I would have said to her, like, whoa, before you do that, do I need an epidural? Is this going to hurt? Is there any chance that this is uncomfortable? My goal for my birth from the beginning, and I had made her very aware of this, was that it be pain-free, because I'm like weak and fragile and pain adverse, like a normal person. I don't do well with pain. I knew I wanted an epidural. And when I've told, like, I have another baby. So when I was preparing for her birth, I got a doula. I was like smart this time, I really committed resources to a doula and towards a different model of care where I would feel that the doctors were like informed of my trauma and more empathetic. And in doing so, I like talked this birth through with the doula and was like, what would you have done had you been in the room? And she was like, I would have said, slow down. This can be very painful for women. It's widely known that this can be incredibly harmful. Let's offer her pain relief and see if she wants it. And that's why I say that I didn't really give my consent. Like, yes, legally, my consent had been given, but she never gave me a full understanding of what it would look like to have this done. And that's what was so shocking about it to me. It was like that wasn't important for her.
Yeah, and I think this is something that I've heard a lot of women saying, and even a friend the other day, she had a cesarean, and 2 days after she left the hospital, she had, a hemorrhage. And
that's so dangerous.
It's so dangerous. But she then went back to the hospital, and the surgeon then told her, oh, well, I decided to tidy up your last C-section scar from your first birth while I was doing the second one. And what's happened is that it's interfered with the lining of your stomach. I mean, honestly, and she had no idea. And you just think, oh my goodness, and people are just, it's like, put up and shut up, because you're in the hands of a professional who you assume knows what they're doing. And of course, I mean, I would be the same, because you trust them, and it's very easy to have the benefit of hindsight and to be able to say, during my second birth, I was like wiser to the fact that I needed to actually ask the questions and to actually assert myself more clearly. But you would really hope that someone in a medical profession would have the sort of empathy and the knowledge to know that they're dealing with something that's so delicate and fragile.
Yeah, the power dynamic is incredibly skewed when you walk into a hospital, especially if you're not a doctor. You're, up against a system that is meant to keep you alive, but also rush you in and out. It's medicine and capitalism, right? So it's a matter of time. And also, you're dealing with people who have so much more education than you do about the subject. So you kind of implicitly trust them. And I'm like, as a girl, I don't know, I'm not like well trained in bossing people around and saying no and standing up for myself. Like, I've had to learn that along the way, but I'm trained to like be polite. And I didn't go into that delivery room knowing how to stare into the face of someone who is an expert in something and tell them that's wrong for me. I wasn't equipped for that. And I really trusted her. Like, I thought that's what doctors did. And when you learn more, especially in America, about the history of gynecology in the States and how it's practiced, and also, legally, the rights that women are given in a hospital, it's totally skewed. I mean, I don't know what it's like here, but in the States, in many, many hospitals, you do not have to give explicit consent for this. But if you're under anesthesia, they can perform a pelvic exam on you to teach young students how to perform like a pap smear without you ever knowing. You could wake up from like hand surgery and have had a bunch of students standing around while you received a pelvic exam just so that they could watch, and they don't have to ask you for your permission. And it's that sort of discounting of a woman's autonomy that I think you really feel throughout the way medicine is practiced. became incredibly clear to me when I was in that delivery room that my comfort and my emotional safety was not a priority.
And I think it's Brooke Shields who's actually written quite openly about what she experienced, didn't she, during...
Yes, just recently. Yeah, you're so right. She had a book coming, actually, the Motherload and her book came out the same day, which is really funny. But, you know, she had written about postpartum depression years ago. She was kind of one of the first, like, celebrity figures in the States to write really openly about it. And I had read her book. I think it came out in the 90s, but, like, I had read it. And then she more recently wrote a book about aging, and she wrote about... a similar thing where a doctor, didn't he like give her a labiaplasty or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we're not anomalies. I've been on this book tour, you know, I've been meeting like hundreds of women across America. I've been in a lot of cities and stuff. I hear every single woman I talk to has a story of trauma, whether it's during pregnancy, fertility, trying to get pregnant, after the baby's born. Nobody leaves the medical system unscathed, especially the first time when you don't know better, unless you have a really great doctor or a wonderful doula or a best friend who knows better and tells you. But you go into these systems totally blind and ill-prepared, and they don't want to take care of you. That's not part of the care model, is taking care of your emotional health.
Yeah, it's really terrifying. Did you have any inkling when you were pregnant that you might reject this child, or you might have a slightly... I don't know, struggle connecting with it, or was your pregnancy plain sailing and relatively normal?
Well, it was miserable. I was like sick, you know, I had nausea all day, every day for the first 20 weeks the first time, till full term the second time. I had like all the bad symptoms. I put on a ton of weight, which, like, you know, par for the course, but it's frustrating when you're trying to feel good in your body. I had acne, like, you know, all the bad things. But I think bigger than the physical changes and the physical symptoms, I had terrible anxiety. I was incredibly scared that, like, every time I pulled my pants down to pee, I thought I was going to see blood in the toilet and it was all going to be over. And I imagined the, like, shame and the guilt and how I would blame myself for that, even if it were, you know, it's never the mom's fault usually when something like that happens. But I was terrified of a loss. I felt incredibly lonely. I didn't feel like I had anyone who really understood what I was going through. I did have friends who had kids, but, like, their kids were enough older and they were farther along in the process. I didn't feel like they really could relate to what I was going through. And then I was just kind of sad. I was depressed, but, like, when you're in it, that's very hard to see, right? And I think I kept hoping, okay, I'm depressed. This isn't great. Pregnancy's hard, but, like, I've heard that before. I knew it might be kind of hard. But when the baby comes, it's all going to be worth it. When the baby comes, it's all going to be worth it. I'm going to love him so much. It's going to be life-changing. Everything's going to fall into place, like the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And then the baby came, and I was like, oh, God. He looks like a little goat. And, like, I want to be anywhere else right now, you know? It was a profound disappointment. I've had the other experience. My birth with my daughter was magical, and I've been in love with her from day one. I had to work to fall in love with my little boy, who's the apple of my eye. He's my great love in this life, you know? But it didn't come easily to me through that haze of disassociation and anxiety and fear and depression. Love wasn't possible. And that's a huge disservice to women when you put them in a position where they can't love their children fully, because caring for something that you don't love fully is very hard. It's very hard to do well, and, like, kids deserve better than that, you know?
I know. Well, I recently interviewed Erica Commissar, who, I don't know if you come across, she's essentially I'd say a female equivalent of Gabor Mate in her theory, and says that, you know, a mother has to be completely devoted to a child, particularly between the ages of 0 and 3. Otherwise, you're really setting that child up, if they've got a predisposition towards a mental health issue, to developing that mental health issue. And a lot of people, you know, disagree with her theory, because they say, well, how can you expect a mother to be entirely devoted and around all the time if she's got to go back to work, and if she can't afford childcare, and you know, what about if she's suffering from postpartum depression? All these questions. But, you know, we hear these things, and as educated women, we know that we're supposed to be these devoted beings, and if we can't show up for our child in the way that society, as you said, feeds us this narrative of needing to show up for our child, then, oh my God, we're lacking, and we're not giving the child the best opportunity to thrive. So there's something wrong with us. But, there are multiple different ways I think that one can parent. And I think going through what you've been through in the long term actually gives you a lot to draw from, particularly just in life and in terms of your levels of empathy and in what you can share with other women and with your children now. I think going through that, and with your husband hopefully too.
Yeah, I think I don't know enough about her to fully discuss this, but I feel very strongly that every woman deserves to indulge all parts of their identity. Men are allowed to do that all day long. And if you want to have a job when you have a 1-year-old, you should have a job. If you want to work outside of the home, you should work outside of the home. Women deserve that. They deserve to have fully developed identities. And I think that what she's talking about works very well in a more community-based model of living, where your child can be parented by people who didn't carry them in their bodies, by the non-gestational parent or whatever. Actually, I was just visiting Columbia University in the neuroscience wing and talking to a team of female scientists who study the behavior of mice and how they act towards babies that they didn't grow themselves in their bodies. And there's not a huge difference in how babies are parented by not their parent in the kind of community where it's expected that your neighbors take care of each other and your aunts and your cousins and your grandparents all live around you. But that's not what a lot of modern society looks like. We're so disconnected from each other. But I think it's would be profoundly unfair to expect women to sacrifice 3 years after every one of their children is born and do nothing but raise that child. And if that were a criteria for being a good mother, then I think we would have to have a real conversation about the expectation on fathers to do something the same, equitable, and also a conversation about what governments need to do to subsidize that and make it possible. I needed to go back to work for my mental health, but also, to contribute to the running of my household.
Yeah, and she's lobbying the US government to give, women much more, I guess, generous maternity leave pays.
Well, good luck with that. I don't know if you know much about the US government, but it doesn't seem like they really respect women.
No, that's the problem, right? And
Yeah.
it's a joke at the moment. Talk us through those first few months then with your baby, because I think for a lot of women who are struggling with postpartum depression or who are pregnant and are worried that they might struggle with postpartum depression or have struggled with it, what were those first few months like, and just how did you get through them day to day?
Okay, well, I'm really lucky. I had a nanny. I had a lot of help. I have a huge safety net. I'm, probably a little bit of an anomaly in that way. And I was so destroyed inside that I spent a lot of time drinking and doing drugs and fixated on death and crying about one day losing my mom or something happening to my brother, or I had nightmares all night every night where I watched my child die, even though I simultaneously felt nothing for him during the day when I would see him, and I felt no compulsion to take care of him. I knew someone was taking care of him and I wanted him to be cared for, but the thought of doing it myself made me feel allergic to my life. And I was like that for months. I hated my life. I hated every second of it. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table so many days, looking out of the window and thinking, I wonder how bad it would be if I just walked off this ledge. It's not like my goal is to die, but my goal is to be anywhere else but here. I don't want to be in this life anymore, and I'm doing this kid a disservice, and I hate my life. And I'm obviously so lucky that I had a nanny and that my mom could come visit me and help out and that my husband was around. But that doesn't take away from the torture and the anguish of having those thoughts is real at any income level, And I figured if it were that bad for me, then what does it look like for a single mom whose family's far away, who can't afford a babysitter? And it made me feel like writing this book was really urgent. It's not like my story is more important than anybody else's, but if it sucks for me, then I hope that gives people empathy into how actually hard it is for so many other women.
Absolutely. And you write about the strain and the toll that it took on your marriage. What state was that in after your husband realised what you were going through? Or probably didn't in the first instance, but just was puzzled by what your reaction was to giving birth to this child.
Yeah, I mean, look, my husband wasn't great. This is kind of an instructional manual for how husbands shouldn't act after their wife has a baby. But I have my own strange empathy for him. And I also think that culture like really doesn't set men up to know how to take care of women and to know how to appreciate and value women and appreciate and value mothers. I don't know what it's like here, and I hope it's different, but like in the States, for me at least, I didn't grow up reading books in school and being assigned books about like the internal life of women. I only found my way to Sylvia Plath and Virginia Woolf as an adult. And I read like The Odyssey, but I never was assigned stories that expressed how complex it is to be a woman living in our world. And I don't think that most men are either. You know, if I wasn't, I don't think men are reading those stories either. And I think like culture does them this huge disservice because it doesn't really give them the tools to be properly empathetic to what it's like to live as a woman in our world, right? So he wasn't going into this like, oh my God, postpartum depression is a possibility, and this, my wife has been sexually assaulted and I have to be vigilant and look out for like these strange symptoms that might equate to a mental health crisis. He wasn't thinking that way. He hadn't been trained to think that way. He had been trained, as many men have, to walk through the world with everyone treating him with kid gloves on and making excuses for him and making his life easy and opening doors for him. You know, that's, I think men walk through the world with like a considerable privilege over women, right? And he also wasn't analyzing that and being critical of it and holding up a mirror to himself. So he didn't do like a great job in the year after I gave birth. I felt a lot of the time like he was another child that I was babysitting in a way. I think in what he thought of me was that I was hormonal, that I hated him, which I did, that I had exacting and unnecessarily high expectations of him, that I demanded too much. He was like, we have help at home, we have a nanny, like what more do you want from me? I'm helping pay for everything, you know? That's not true equity, but I think for him it felt like it. And we had a real crisis because I was going to leave him at a certain point. I couldn't take it anymore. And I was very clear with him. I gave him an ultimatum, and this isn't self-help. I'm not telling women out there to give their husbands ultimatums. I will say when you mean it, it often works, okay? So I meant it. And I was like, I'm done with you unless you can really man up and become the person that I believe you can be. Which is incredibly like respectful and the kind of man who wants an equitable relationship. And like he went to therapy and got it together. But I think that's really hard for a lot of people to be that accountable. And it's made our relationship incredible because now it's deeply honest and we're really simpatico. But there were years where I thought, not only do I not want to be married to him, but I don't want to be married to anyone that I have to take care of in any way. I just want to focus on me and making sure my foundation is strong and be able to be there for my children and what they need. And I don't need a man. Because the reality was I was doing everything anyway. So I was like, well, if I'm going to be doing it all by myself, I don't also need you leaving your dishes next to the dishwasher. What's the point of that? But we've really like come full circle, and I feel really lucky that I'm with a partner who's willing to be critical of himself that way.
So what do you say to women who are really struggling in their marriages and just say, I just feel like my husband's a different person, he doesn't relate to me on any level at all, and I've married someone who I feel like is a stranger really now?
Well, I would say if you can afford it, go to couples therapy and find a couples therapist that you both trust. Because I think that it's really hard, especially in the first year after you have a kid, like your time is so limited. Finding an hour to like connect with each other, let alone have sex or anything like that, is so impossible that the intimacy of the partnership that you had suffers already. And I always tell women, like, you're not allowed to get divorced in the first year after you have a kid. You might leave his ass eventually, but it can't be in year one. That's not fair to anybody. And couples therapy was extremely helpful for me, but I had to find the right therapist. Like, it's like any other relationship. You meet, the first one is not always the right one, right? And that's like a luxury, right? Like therapy is really expensive and it takes time, but I think it's so invaluable, especially when it's resources well spent, because those problems and it's mostly about how you communicate with someone else. It's like very hard to know how to do on your own without an expert. So I would say if you can afford it or figure out a way to like finagle it, couples therapy is invaluable. But also looking back, like I never fully explained to my husband the way I was really feeling and all the complexities and all the shame and all the guilt that I was feeling, because I wasn't in a place where I could even be honest with myself about it. And I started a really deep like journaling practice every morning where I write really extensively. And I think getting very clear on what fulfills you, what makes you happy, what your boundaries are, what frustrates you, writing it all down, having it in one place helps you be more articulate in what you explain to them, so it doesn't feel like as much of an attack when you speak to them. And then like therapy really helped me with the communication style, but you have to be clear on it yourself before you can communicate anything, you know? It can't just all be anger. You can't just be like, I hate you because I changed 20 more diapers than you did today. It has to be like, I'm really frustrated because I don't like changing diapers either, but I want to feel like I'm in this together with you. Like, will you please join me and make it so that we're in this together? And I think we should go to couples therapy until we feel like we're on the same page about that. But yeah, couples therapy is rad. That's the best.
Couples therapy all the way. So, and how long were you in couples therapy for? Do you still do it now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been doing it because I've been on my book tour and like I'm not in New York so much, but I think that mental health practices come and go in your life, but they're lifelong. It's practice. They're lifelong, you know, like certain phases of your year or times in your life, you don't have the space to commit to them in the same way. But like, for example, I'm in New York all of June. It's calm, it's quiet. My kids are in camp. I'm doing all the therapy. It's an important part of being an adult, is learning how to commit to the kind of self-care that isn't just like facials, that really improves your ability to navigate the world. And it's important. Like I have children, I want to be a good model for them. I want to be able to model kind, caring communication so that they automatically know how to do that. I think the best thing you can do for your children, besides teaching them to read and vaccinating them, is teaching them how to love. And good communication is like a really important part of being loving, you know? So therapy is important to me because I think it's like a very foundational way of doing right by my children.
Yeah, and I think this concept of mirroring, and I think if children are able to see that their parents have a healthy relationship and there's a really healthy dynamic and they are, you know, they love each other and they respect each other, it really encourages them to then develop healthy relationships with other individuals.
Absolutely. I mean, my parents, I've never once seen them fight, okay? Growing up, I never saw them fight. I'm sure it happened, but it happened behind closed doors. And I think they thought that they were like protecting me from this thing adults do. But the reality was they were setting me up to not know how to do it myself. And like, you know, research shows us now, as you all know, like people fight, but what's really important to relationships is how you repair and what the repair looks like. And I want to model that for my children. I want them to know that grown-ups sometimes don't agree on everything, but they find ways to come back together and to repair their relationship and make it stronger. And that's something that I'm like so lucky that I got to do with my husband, you know? We found our way back to each other.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful because I think once you found your way back to each other, you hope that the relationship is then stronger than ever.
Yeah, and also like it's stronger than ever, but there's also a part of me and him too that's like, I know that I can stand on my own and that I'm with you because I choose to be with you, but not because I need to be with you. And something that the experience of having this mental health crisis taught me is that there is no one coming to save you. At the end of the day, you can only save yourself. You can have all the wonderful husbands in the world, but you have to fix yourself. You have to stare your own demons in the face and decide that they can't be your demons anymore. And no one can do that for you but you. And it's so much work. It's really hard. But when you know that you can stand on your own 2 feet and that power is within every single one of us, if you want to find your path to it, when you're in a relationship with someone, it's because you want to be with them and you make that choice every day, not because you're desperate to be with them or because you need them.
I think you make a really valid point about anyone. You've got to fix yourself in this life. And I think a lot of people look to marriage, they look to things like having children, and they think they're going to fill that void. But ultimately, until you address that relationship with yourself and you really look inside, you're never going to be fulfilled or content.
It's true. Sorry, bad news,
Shit.
everybody.
It's really
but-
shit, isn't it? It's like all these externals that you're like, okay, well, when I meet that man, then I'll be fixed. It's just like, no.
And, you know, I think like the stronger you are on your own, that is when you meet the man, or that is when the good thing comes to you, because you've built a foundation for it.
True. I think the right man. I've definitely noticed with the types of guys that I attracted when I was very, like, in the height of my eating disorder and my OCD, it just would have been so wrong for me on every level and so unhealthy.
Of course.
So yeah, no, I really agree with that. How did you start to rediscover yourself? Because I can imagine, I mean, I've been there as well, thinking that I'm not actively planning to kill myself, but I don't want to exist anymore. I don't want to go on. I'm really existing than living. And how did you start to just step back into your life and find that sense of identity?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I had to go on antidepressants. I went on SSRIs, and it was a clutch move for me. I don't think I would be, I'm not on them now, but I don't think that I would be here today if it weren't for them. And I had such a stigma against them, and I felt like it was cheating, and I felt like I was failing because I wasn't pulling myself up by my bootstraps and fixing my brain on my own. But I had this, maybe you can relate to this because of OCD. I had this really strange thought process in the throes of my postpartum depression where I was very afraid that if I was honest with anyone about the anxieties that I was having, that they would come true. Like, I thought, I was so scared to walk down the stairs with my baby. I thought he would fall out of my arms and his like tiny brain would smash and he would die. And I thought if I said to my therapist, okay, I have these crazy worries and these crazy thoughts, I can't walk down the stairs, I thought then the next time I walked down the stairs, it would happen. And I thought I was like a total freak for thinking that way, that I could like control the universe with my thoughts. But it's really common, right? It's called magical thinking, or at least that's what my therapist calls it. And many people, especially with OCD, have that. When I started taking SSRIs, I got really lucky. They worked for me right away. The first one I started taking worked for me. And I know that's not always the case because everyone's body chemistry is so different. But within a week, that went away. And once that went away, I could be fully honest with a therapist for the first time ever. And I said what I just told you, and immediately felt like so much lighter, like something lifted off my shoulders, like a physical weight lifted. And I remember thinking like, God, that feels good. I haven't felt that light in a year. And then I like couldn't shut up. Once I said one shame, I was like, that was really fun. And I kept saying them. And then before she knew it, I'm sure the therapist was like, okay, whoa, slow down. It just made me feel so much better. And it made me feel like me for the first time in a long time, to be honest, and to cop to all of that. And it took a really long time of unspooling all of those things. It took, you only go to therapy like once or twice a week. So it took weeks and weeks and weeks to get through all the material, talk about my issues with my mom and my husband and my baby, and say all my things I needed to be honest about that I hadn't been able to. But I don't think I ever could have gotten there without those SSRIs. They gave me a light at the end of the tunnel. They can't do all the work for you, right? Like, you still have to manage your damage and go through it all and tease it all out and analyze it and analyze your part in it. But it was an incredible entry point for me. And I'm like really grateful they exist. And then it was just so much. I've done like every kind of therapy. I've tried them all. Ketamine therapy, EMDR, all the different modalities. And they've each helped in a different way. And they've opened up new pathways. And like, I'm not done. I'm not perfect. This is going to shock you. Can't believe I admitted that. But I still have so much stuff to work out. And it's like a lifelong discipline that we get to do. We don't have to do it. It's a freaking gift that we get to be here and we get to do it. And that's a huge change for me. I mean, there were years of my life where I never could have felt grateful for something like this. And part of the perspective shift of what I've been through is feeling really, really grateful that I get to ride this roller coaster.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. And that's what I've rapidly discovered like in the last few years, is that you think there's a destination and there's an end point. And in fact, as you say, old adages, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And as you said, all these different forms of help and treatment and therapy and conversations, they each put another piece of the jigsaw in place. Yeah. And not you sort of think one person's going to hand you that magic formula or give you that magic pill that's going to solve everything. And it's just not the case. It's just baby steps and just getting up each rung of the ladder one step at a time. And I think that's really reassuring to hear. And I hope like lots of listeners also find that helpful, because it's certainly been the case for me. And I'm actually trying to come over to the US this summer to try some ketamine assisted therapy, which, yeah, I'm curious to know, how did that work out for you?
It's not legal here. Is that
No.
why? I went to a really interesting doctor named Dr. Brooks at New York Ketamine Institute. He was like one of the kind of pioneering doctors in the space. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but as I remember it, ketamine was first used as an anesthesia, I believe, in the Korean War. And it became apparent that soldiers it's a very fast acting anesthesia. And it became apparent that soldiers who had used ketamine in the field as opposed to other forms of anesthesia had less PTSD. So they started trying to use it therapeutically for humans. And Dr. Brooks himself, I believe, has authored like over 100 papers or something like that. But there have been, 600 plus really like well-regarded papers about the efficacy of ketamine and what it does to pathways in the brain in humans who have experienced trauma, because trauma, I think, impedes the way your brain cells reproduce and grow and form, and ketamine can reverse that and cause new pathways to grow. And there's proof of that, So for me, I had friends who had done this therapy, and it's intravenous. I think I did 6 treatments in 12 days or in 14 days maybe. And I had friends who had done it and were like, treatment number 3 blew my brain, changed my life, never looked back, fixed me. That wasn't my experience. The change was more incremental, but it was really cool. And I'm really glad I did it. I found it really interesting. And I had, not everyone has this. I think the way that people respond to the drug can be very different. But in one of my trips, and you're like in like a dentist chair, you do it. I was laying there and I was like kind of having visions. And one of my visions was that I was going to have another kid, and being around the breakfast table with my kids. And it kind of gave me the push that I think I sort of needed to think about a future for myself, where I would have another birth and where that could be a healing experience and not scary, and where I could start to imagine having a chance to grow my family without it being re-traumatizing. And now I have another kid, and it was kind of that moment that made me want her. So I credit it really with opening my mind to that, and that felt important to me. But I think the way it manifests healing in different people is very different, and it wasn't for me a watershed moment. Yeah. That's not a reason not to do it. It's still cool.
No, and I will. And I think, like you said, it's just everything teaches you something, and whatever you get out of it, it's always an experience. And that's what I put it down to. When would you say that the postpartum depression had fully sort of worn off and you really felt like you could unconditionally love your son?
Around the time he was 2. I felt really differently. And it grows and changes every single day. But I get the greatest joy of my life, and the most fulfilled I feel is looking at the world through his eyes. And I also love working. And the two things are incompatible. And that brings a certain kind of grief to me. There's like the myth of having it all is a myth. You can't be both things well all the time. We're a working mom and a mom. And I hate to admit that. It makes me so mad to admit that. And I feel a lot of the time like I have to choose between them. But I think working and being devoted to something and incredibly passionate about it makes me better at being a mom. And I think being a mother to him and being always reassured in the wonder of humanity, because I see his pureness and his innocence and the way he laughs and the way he chooses joy and play and happiness at every turn, makes me better at writing and at connecting with people. So I think they're important for each other, but it's really hard to do both, I have to admit.
Oh, definitely. And I think, there's a woman called Zoe Blakey, Zoe Blakey, and she has a platform called Motherkind, and she talks about this a lot, about the fact that you can't live up to that expectation of being a perfect mother, a perfect employee, a perfect entrepreneur, whatever it is, a perfect wife. They're just, you have to settle with the fact that, you know, suddenly you're operating on, say, 60 to 70% capacity in each role that you decide to focus your attention on, but you can't do anything to your maximum because that's just a physical impossibility.
It is, and I think that's why you have to decide like what your kind of internal standards of excellence are and what success means to you. And what I've realized is that the best I feel about any job that I do in the parenthood sphere or in my work, I always want to be as transparent and honest as possible. That's what feels best to me. And sometimes that means like you're not the most popular, or you're not the coolest, or you're not the most soundbitey for the internet or whatever, but I have found that when I am hearing myself and really just saying what I feel deep down and not trying to sugarcoat it, that level of honesty is what feels best to me. So when I'm with my kids, I try and be my like purest, truest self with them. And when I'm writing, I try and represent what feels the most honest and real to me. And that is the only way that I can feel successful at both. Because if I hold myself up to like external standards of like making certain lists because I sold enough books, or looking a certain way at the parent-teacher association meeting at school, or having the best bake sale goods for my kids' school sale or whatever, I'm never going to meet all of those. But I can show up as me, and I can be devoted to being the most me I can be all the time. And that's usually what feels better to me anyway.
Yeah, that's
Go with that.
Yeah, that's lovely. What was the process of writing Motherload like?
It was so fun. I loved it so much. I mostly did it in my bed with no pants on, which was a delight.
Love that.
It's also
Love
where
that
I'm the most
detail.
me. But it was incredible. I had been looking back. Like I said, I'd been a longtime journaler, and I was looking back over journals during COVID, and I was like, wow, I was crazy when I had postpartum. And I thought it was kind of entertaining, and maybe I would turn it into an essay or something. And I'd never written before. I worked in the art world at a big international art gallery for like almost 15 years, and I loved my job, but it was dead quiet during COVID, right? So I started looking back at these journals, and I was like, maybe I'll write an essay. And then I just could not stop. And I had written like 130,000 words or something, which is essentially a book. And I was taking a weekly online writing course on Zoom. And I loved the community that I was building, and I felt like really accountable to this group of women, and we met every week and read each other our work. And I was like, I feel better doing this than I've felt doing anything in a long time. I'm gonna like see what happens. I put together a proposal. When you write memoir, people may not know, but you don't have to write the whole thing. Like when you write a novel to sell it. I sold my book the same day we were meant to go back into the gallery full time post-COVID. No more work from home. And I was like, all right, I think I'm just going to write my book. I think that's a sign. So I devoted myself to writing it. And it was incredible how much of a relief I felt in knowing that I was providing a narrative for even one other woman to feel like seen. I felt like I learned so much about myself. Like I had learned this connection between sexual assault and birth trauma for me that I had never read about. I had learned how to advocate for myself in a doctor's office and in my relationship and with my own mother, and how to be accepting of my relationship with my mother. I'd learned all this stuff for me, and it's all, I'm sure, out there in the world, but I learned it in the context of my life. And it felt like a relief to be able to tell it to other people. People often are like, was it cathartic writing this? And I'm like, no, I was past catharsis, you know. Cathartic was therapy and the journaling. This, to me, I felt more in control of. It's not like I needed some emotional release, but it did feel, I felt like a gift to me that I got to share it with other people, and it was really fun to do. And I've been like, I feel so lucky that I'm at a place in my life where I still get to like learn new things and meet really smart, interesting women who are killing it at their jobs, you know? And I got to do that like every day with this book. So it's absolutely wonderful. I've loved every part of it. The being on tour has been difficult because I've been away from my daughter took her first steps, and I was in Washington, D.C. or something. But even that's been a gift because I've been connecting with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women, many of whom feel very disillusioned and disappointed by how culture treats them. Many of whom feel really traumatized by aspects of pregnancy and birth and motherhood or not motherhood or just being a woman. And it's incredible to feel the power in numbers that women have when they share their stories.
And I mean, I think what's so clever about it is that it's honest, but it's quite dark at the same time as being littered with humor.
Okay, good. I'm glad you think so. I tried.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you just, you really hit it.
Well, you
on.
Brits get the humor. You're so good at that. You know, that's like, I feel like humor is a national pastime here. We have baseball. You guys have being funny.
No, well, I would really encourage listeners who are interested in the subject to definitely, buy a copy, because I think it's just so beautifully written, and you can tell that you're also a writer at heart.
That's so nice.
No, it's true. It's very true. What piece of advice would you like to leave a listener who's in the throes of postpartum depression and just doesn't want to go on and doesn't think they're ever going to be able to bond with this child that they've given birth to and can't understand why they've been overcome by these forces that they can't control?
Oh, it's the worst position to be in. Look, there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's the power within every single person on this planet to fight through that and find a way to feel fulfilled and joy-filled with parenting. But it takes looking at yourself in an emotional mirror, and it takes a lot of work, and you have to be honest with yourself about how you feel. You have to be able to admit, first and foremost, that you're not fulfilled and you're not happy in order to fix the problem. And with all the pressure on women to be smiley and perfect and happy and polite, that alone can be very hard to do. But you have to get really clear on how you really feel about things. You have to write it down and put words to it and be honest with yourself. And you have to ask for help. You can't be so afraid to look like a failure that you don't ask for help. Whether it's from a partner or a therapist, someone you pay, or a friend, you have to admit it's so filled with shame. And I know why it's so hard. I've been there. But you have to admit to what you're not happy about in order to fix it.
And what was the one most helpful thing a friend or a family member did for you? And what would you say to people who have someone in their immediate circle who's suffering?
Well, I had a doctor, just my general practitioner who I saw once a year, who looked at me and said, like dead in the eye, and said, "You're in crisis and you're going to explode your life if you don't fix it." And no one had been that honest with me. And it can be really hard to be honest with friends, but I think that's really important. To, if you see someone and you suspect that they're struggling, they likely are. You see only the tip of the iceberg, right? So I think it's a great time to practice being really honest with people. It only takes one person saying that for you to be like, whoa, okay, I got to fix this. Other people are noticing. And I was so grateful that she did that for me. I've only seen the woman like 4 times in my life or whatever, and she went out and did it. And that's risky, I could have never paid her money again or gone back there. So she did me a real solid, and I think women deserve to do that for each other.
Sarah, thank you so much. It's just, such incredible openness, and I know that loads of women are going to find your story and your journey so relatable and really, really helpful, as well as entertaining, which I hate to say, but it's true.
Thank you.
Thank you.